Hey guys, and welcome back to Learn Faeria. Last week I was in Paris casting the Go Faeria Clash, and what an awesome event it was. If you missed it, I'd strongly recommend giving it a watch. You can find the VODs at playfaeria.com. The Go Faeria Clash saw the rise and fall of Mono Green. Mono Green had already been a powerful deck, but when piloted by highly skilled players, we got to see its maximum potential. Ultimately, Green fell to the arsenal of King Dan's, who used a blue-red and yellow-red control deck to take them down. The one good thing about Green is the cheap cost of its cards. Green makes a good budget deck, and this week I want to show you a deck that newer players could craft easily. I've taken Lifecoach's list and I've modified it so it's cheaper for you to craft. Once you start getting more packs, you can add the rarer cards in, like Tephra. So let's take a look at the deck list and then we'll move on to land placement and strategy. Let's start by looking at the heavy hitters. These creatures will help you dominate the board with their strong baseline stats. Grove Guardian is a 5/6 with Taunt, which is your strongest defensive creature. This card can become very threatening once buffed up. Fearian Golem is your most expensive creature when it comes to land requirement. You need to control 5 forests before he can be summoned. As a 5/10, this guy can usually clear 2 to 3 creatures before going down. Verduran Force is your most offensive creature with a powerful stat line of 7/7. Verduran Force will lead the charge to your opponent's God Orb. The next selection of creatures gives you powerful buffs. These will allow you to get additional value from your creatures. What this means is if one of your creatures is low on health, you can buff him back up and let him clear an enemy without dying. All these creatures act as good Faeria gatherers once they've given out their buffs. Tiki Piper gives a creature +4 health. This will help your creatures stay alive in combat, but can also give you extra Faeria when using the event Feed the Forest. Tiki Caretaker is a very powerful card with a lot of utility. The +3/+3 buff can be used for 3 different things. 1. Buff a creature so it can clear an enemy or keep it alive when attacking. 2. Spread power across the board by buffing smaller creatures. This can be important because if you invest all your buffs into one creature, it could be removed by an event card. Lastly, Caretaker can buff himself, creating a 4/4 creature. When Oakland dies, he buffs a creature in your hand with +4/+4. This is a very powerful effect because it can turn your creatures into powerhouses. You want Oakland to die as soon as possible, but don't be afraid to buff him to help you fight for the board. I'd like to highlight this last creature as it showed its potential during the Go Faeria Clash. Spirit of Rebirth is a card that can snowball out of control if not removed. You want to keep these guys alive for as long as possible, and the more you get on board, the better. Over longer games, these guys will buff up your hand gradually as the game progresses. The +1/+1 to a creature in hand will start to add up, especially if you have multiple spirits on the field. The last 2 creatures in the deck are to help with the early game. Ancient Boar has decent stats for its cost, but when you have a creature with 5 life or more in play, he becomes 2 Faeria. Always try to get him on board with the cost reduction. Living Willow acts as a cheap defensive card against rush decks, but also a great target for Feed the Forest. Speaking of Feed the Forest, let's take a look at it. Feed the Forest sacrifices a friendly creature and converts their health into Faeria and draws you a card. This card gives you the Faeria you need to summon your big creatures, but also lets you dig deeper into your deck. Living Willow is a perfect target for this, but don't be afraid to use it on bigger creatures if you desperately need that Faeria. The last 2 cards in the deck are Elderwood Embrace, an event card that buffs a creature's stats by +2 and +4. I added these to replace the legendary Eridon and Tephra to keep this a budget list. However, if you own either of these cards, I'd recommend putting them in the deck over the Elderwood Embrace. Now you've seen the deck, let's go over the strategy. Your job is to bully your opponent off the board with massive green creatures. You don't have any removal cards like the other colours, so you will be relying on your creatures to deal with your opponent's threats. You need to buff your creatures wisely and try and keep as many creatures on board as you can. Take control of the Faeria pools and starve your opponent of Faeria. Fundamentally, this version of Mono Green is played as a defensive deck, looking to stabilise on board, then march up towards your opponent's orb. Start the match with controlling your Faeria pools, and then start slowly pushing your forces up the board. Use the size of the board to harvest Faeria on your way up, but take control of them to stop your opponent from gathering. In your opening hand, you want to look for Verduran Force and Spirit of Rebirth. Force can be used to fend off aggressive decks, and Spirit can be used to gather Faeria. Be sure to get the Spirit of Rebirth down so you can start buffing your hand. Don't be afraid to play aggressively if your opponent is playing a slow game. Verduran Force can be a nightmare to deal with if your opponent doesn't have an answer to it. So that's it for Learn Faeria's Guide to Mono Green. I hope you are enjoying your experience with Faeria and find success with this budget green deck. Be sure to check playfaeria.com for more video guides and articles. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.